For an orthoglass splint, you will need stockinette, you will need web roll, you will need the orthoglass splint, scissors to cut the splint, as well as water and an ace wrap to finish the splint. The next splint we're going to do is the coaptation splint. In order to do the coaptation splint, you'll always measure the patient's unaffected side. You will start and measure at the top as high as you can go, measure around their elbow, and you'll want the patient to have their arm at 90 degrees. And this measurement is what you'll use to cut your orthoglass with. You'll take your web roll, wrap it around the patient's arm. Using the 50-50 technique, you'll wrap 50% of the web roll where you just wrapped it on the patient's arm to ensure full coverage of the patient's arm. And because the splint will come up over the patient's shoulder, you will not be able to wrap the web roll all the way up. You'll have to stop right at the patient's shoulder. The next thing you'll do is cut the orthoglass to the appropriate size. Always make sure to tuck the orthoglass back inside and clamp it so it doesn't dry out. And once you take the orthoglass out of the packaging, make sure that you pull the edges over any fiberglass that's sticking out so it's not rough against the patient's skin. You'll then dip the orthoglass into the water. Fan fold, ensuring that you wring out as much water as possible so the splint will dry quicker. As you're applying the splint, ensure the patient's elbow is at 90 degrees. And then you will bring the splint up as high as you can get it, but again, always make sure, especially when it's this close to their neck, that you have the padding pulled over top of the fiberglass so it does not irritate the patient. You'll then take your ace wrap, wrap it around the splint, ensuring the ace wrap is snug but not too tight. And because of the location of the splint, you're not able to wrap the entire splint with the ace bandage. So wrap as high as you can. And then while the splint is setting, make sure the patient's elbow is at 90 degrees and mold the patient's shoulder to the splint, and it'll take about 4 to 5 minutes for the splint to completely dry. Once the splint is completely dry, do a quick capillary refill check to make sure that you do not have the ace wrap on too tight.